Test.
Now we have a plug here. You're just making it the real way, huh? The way it's supposed to be.
I just don't want anybody to kill themselves.
Oh, the Fredericksburg challenge.
I'll help you get it out of.
You don't want anyone to kill themselves? That's what makes this place exciting.
Well, you know what? It comes back to my relatives as being farmers and holes in the field being cows or horses.
I take it now.
No, I didn't. Do you have a USB mic? I thought.
I have one, but not with me.
Okay. Do? I'll take. Can I take your laptop and our supply out and I'll do it there? Go ahead.
It's not a total loss. I figured out how to get those icons off the screen.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know why.
Yeah, I knew you couldn't do it after the fact.
All the sponsors are here. This is
I guess it.
I think if it's LM, it doesn't look familiar.
Okay, so that's not here. Yeah. I used to live in a house that didn't have a wired ground. Which
With this, I was going to say, with this kind of equipment, that's not a good idea. Although, look at me.
Yeah.
That's what they ship it with.
Yeah.
Dig out the instrumentation, you'll find all sorts of things, including incorrect polarity.
By the way, any of you who are new, the Wi-Fi information's over here to the right.
All set? Cool.
How are you, Peter?
Doing good. Were you here like an hour ago to set up?
Yes, I was.
I may want to be here early. That's too early for me.
Yeah, that's not happening. Well, considering I finished my presentation at 2:30 this morning, that wasn't happening.
Well, I've been there.
As usual.
I've been sitting in hotel rooms and finishing up like at 4 or 5 in the morning, having to go to a meeting at 8 or 9 o'clock the next day, right?
Yeah.
Making sure everything worked and.
No, this was me writing the damn thing.
Well, that includes that because you've got to write around what works and what doesn't. So, yeah, I have a problem with time. My current company is working on the screen is nice. It's not 2. It's 2 o'clock it starts, and not at 2:10.
Well, if you're doing it 36 hours, in which case, 2 nights ago.
What the box?
Let me know when you want to go live. It's ready. I just need to toggle from private to public.
With all your buttons. Yeah. I'm over the man.
Good.
Not a good decision we had last week, or was it 2 weeks ago?
I showed up. Where are you now? Made it harder. Just line progression.
Yep. Regression.
Yeah.
Probably
I did that go.
Hey John, did you test the projector yet?
I'm working on that now.
Okay. Well, we had all kinds of issues last time, and
I know, that's...
I'll host at the Magic Touch.
Wait.
No.
Hold on. Okay. All good.
You're not using the microphone on your computer or anything, like you're just talk.
I'm just going to talk. I won't even be here.
Well, last time I had a problem was, oh, it's plugged in now. It wasn't plugged in last time.
Oops.
Yep. Can I get Susie up and talk before we start, or do you want to wait until last?
Can you ask her?
I can ask. That's why I'm asking you first.
Yeah.
Well, if she's going to come up and talk, I'll turn it on for her.
Well, yeah, when she starts.
You have to solve these, and I don't like them.
Well, they were family related, so as much as I love the Saturdays and Saturday mornings with you guys.
So 2 more weeks, we fly over to London to hang out for a week.
In 4 days, my family will fly over here.
All right. I just did an exam in Seattle this past week. It was just a 2-day trip, but that gave me some practice butting a seat for 5 hours.
That is killing.
Look at me, it's all about cash. Good to see you again.
Aren't you taking a picture of me? Thank you. Thank you.
Is that okay, John? So the lights on?
That's even better, thank you.
No, not at all. I'm 5. You're a lot, actually.
Yeah.
NC700?
Wow.
And I have my bag on there too. So,
Who was less powerful like last, but
someone else will
yeah, so it's crazy.
Peter,
Oh, thank you.
what did she say? What did she say? Does she-
I'm sorry, she says yes, but although she was trying to say she'll be down there.
Before or after?
By the way, before we started, and then we come up afterwards, and then I'm feeling a lot of people come
Straight
up
Chinese.
even before we get to the hospital.
100% Chinese.
Here we go.
If Susie's going to talk, we should ask them to step up too.
He knows it's an open invitation.
Well, yeah.
But if you want it.
And everyone who haven't been here before, Wi-Fi password is here.
Also, if you left your parking ticket in your car, now's a really good time to go get it because there's a validation machine in the quote-unquote lobby out front. So be sure to have it and probably do it on your way out because I'm paranoid that way. I figured they give you a timer once you validate. So
I just report on that. Because remember, I was the one that didn't, I validated the second I came in and it did work.
yeah, okay. So yeah,
But I'm waiting this time, so.
yes, waiting is good.
Come twice.
No, I'm looking at total seats.
There's a whole bunch of chairs in the back in case there's overflow. But then they won't have a desk to set up.
There's roughly 50 seats. I'm thinking we might
50.
put 5, well, technically 50.
And there's always the front row. Nobody sits in the front row.
Would you want to sit next to me? Or closer? We're going to go ahead and get started in about 5 minutes or so.
They're bringing some more chairs. We're out of tables.
Yeah. Yeah, that might be You can sit up front. I try not to spit when I talk.
Hi. All right, go in public, man.
Pardon?
Go in public. All right. Just let me know. I got my finger on the trigger.
Let me finish my
Okay.
own things and let them get settled a little bit.
And the link is on the meetup.
For those of you settling in, if you look at the meetup page, I put a comment in there early this morning with the link for the presentation. So if you want to pull that up. Also, I'm hoping that you guys all have Git installed on whatever OS you happen to be using, because as I said, I'm not going to cover that because that becomes a rabbit hole.
Can you type in Git?
You can hack into it remotely as well.
Good morning, everyone. Morning. Morning. Yeah, it's like a classroom. Yeah. For those of you who haven't seen, here's the Wi-Fi information. If you need to connect, you will probably, if you want to follow along with what I'm doing, you'll want to be connected, especially for the GitLab and GitHub part. Before I start babbling about stuff on the slides, I want to thank our two sponsors, Ridgeline International, who have graciously provided the space for us, and Susie from SG2 Recruiting, who supplied our morning wake-up stuff. So I want to thank them both. Susie is, as I mentioned, is a recruiter, and I'm going to let her come up and, or she can stand up where she is, whichever she really prefers, because I'm picky that way. So for those of you who are looking for jobs, Susie deals mostly with cleared positions.
Or clearable.
Pardon?
You don't have to be cleared, you have to be clearable.
Clearable. So, so I'll leave it to her for a few minutes.
Good morning. I know it's been a while since I've been able to join you, but I'm excited to be back. For those of you who may be job seekers, I am looking for cloud operations engineers in Chantilly, as well as individuals who are working with Red Hat Linux or OpenShift products. Unfortunately, all of those positions are for individuals who are clearable, which requires U.S. citizenship. But for those of you who don't, but are looking for new opportunities, I do have relationships with the regional recruiter network. So I'm happy to help in other ways if it's not directly with my clients, perhaps helping you find opportunities with my colleagues who are working across the board in the Washington metropolitan area. Good luck with the presentation.
Can I ask you to clarify one thing? So when you haven't been here, we have people coming up asking. Can people ask you what kind of skills are in demand, and maybe get help that way to see what you might need to know in order to get a job?
Absolutely. I offer advice regarding job seekers in terms of their resumes, their resume review, perhaps even taking a look at their online profiles. I do that on the side, so that's not my full-time job, but I do help out in that regard. So if you have any questions, I'm at least able to help you take a look at to review your material, see what some of the pros and cons and how to improve it, maybe just to increase the likelihood that a recruiter will find you online.
And I can attest to the help that Susie gives, because I've rewritten my resume based on advice that I've gotten from Susie. So.
Okay. Great. Well, enjoy.
Thank you.
Looking forward to the presentation.
And Stephen from Ridgeline
There's a lot of new people here today, so I'll do the same thing. Woo! Go get, I guess.
Get it done.
I work for Ridgeline International. We sponsor the space. For those that know the history, for those that have heard it multiple times, I apologize. These guys were talking about how they need new space, support new people, and I approached my company about, hey, can we just put them in the room at the bottom of our building? It ended up being too small, so my company graciously offered to sponsor the space. So every one of these meetings, Ridgeline International is actually paying for this space. It's not free. So the thing about my company is we're kind of like a boutique tech company in the Tysons metro area, actively hiring people that have full stack development, people that know how to do Android development, Linux, Windows, Java. We're looking for everything, even looking for RF engineers. So the thing that I tell you is we have a horrible domain name. It's ridgelineintl.com. intl.com. So if you go to jobs.ridgelineintl.com, go ahead and apply on there, say you're at Novolug, and you're good. The last thing I want to say, my company does 20% 401k across the board. All employees, 20% 401k. Anybody that's young, looking for a good job and to set themselves up for retirement, Ridgeline's an awesome company.
Oh, and you have to show them the back of your shirt.
It's technically wrong, I might add. Bonus points for anybody that knows why it's wrong.
Parody?
Well, yes, the digit on the bottom, but it's on the wrong side. Yeah, that's because
It's in the transmission.
somebody failed CompSat. Not me.
And also, for those of you interested, there are links to both Susie's website and Ridgeline on the meetup page. They are both listed as sponsors. How many people here, this is your first time visiting us at Novolug? This is your first meeting. Welcome to those who are. Just so you know, a couple of warnings. I have a potty mouth, so I will say words that you shouldn't say in a public speaking forum, because that's just me. Second, I am a very informal person. If you need to interrupt to ask a question, feel free. It won't upset me. I generally write my presentations to cover about 2/3 of the time allotted, and I expect the rest will all be just talking about the crap I'm talking about. So feel free to interrupt if you need to. Lastly, we are always, always, always looking for speakers. I kind of knew I'd have to do this when I agreed to be an organizer, but you all hear me talk way too damn much. And it would really be helpful to have other people come up and do this. You don't need to be an expert in what you're talking about. I am by no means a Git expert. In fact, the stuff I'm talking about today, I had to teach some of myself some of it as I'm writing the slides. So I am not an expert, but I know enough to come up and at least give an intro, which is what we're looking for. We want mostly intro-level stuff, because there are some people here who know Git really well. There are some people here who don't know Git at all. I don't want to put the people who don't know a subject off by just totally flooding them with really advanced information. So I try to shoot for an intro-level thing, which is what you have here. I put a list up at the end of some of the stuff that you can do with Git that I'm not going to cover, and mostly because I don't know how to do those things myself, and I'll learn eventually. So you don't need to be an expert to come up and talk. Just have something you're passionate about, something that you enjoy doing, and share it with us. We have had all kinds of really, really great talks and speakers come up. The only limit is got to be open source. yes, we're a Linux user group, but if all we talked about was Linux, it would be boring, to be honest. You can only talk about it for so long. So as long as it's open source, I'm good with that. If you have something you want to talk about, send me a message on Meetup, email me. I've got a Trello page that lists our upcoming discussions along with topics that people have expressed interest in. So I believe that link is on the Meetup page. I'll make sure it is sometime this weekend. Have a look. If something on the list interests you and you want to talk about it, let me know. If there's something not on the list that you'd be interested, let me know. So does anyone have anything else they want to bring up before I start boring you with Git? Bless you.
Jobs at the
Pardon?
jobs at that.
Yeah, afterwards Susie will come up again. Those of you who are looking for jobs and those of you who are hiring, if you want to come up at the end and get together, maybe somebody will get a job out of this and it'll be worthwhile. Lastly, we are really close to finishing up with the novalug.org webpage. And that should be posted and up, redone in the next, hopefully, week or so. This has been a busy week. We're ready now, I just haven't had a chance to do my part. And that's pretty much it. So, all right. As it says up here and all on the meetup, we're going to be talking about Git, GitHub, and GitLab. Maybe we'll be talking about these. Oh, come on. All right. I love it when things work well. That's what you're sure, not me. Okay, so some of the things we'll be covering. What is Git? Why do I need Git? I've thrown together a small, very limited glossary. It gives a link to the rest of the actual Git glossary. Those of you following along will. Yes.
Will you be covering why Git rather than some other version system?
Kind of, sort of. It'll be more an overall why Git, but
Yeah, if you don't know the history, I can do that when we get to it.
yeah, I'll throw in a couple of reasons why Git is better than Subversion or CVS or whatever. Those of you following along will create an empty Git repo, and then I'll show you what happens when you create that Git repo. We'll then create a Git repo from existing data. So you already have your web or your source code already written. You can turn that into a Git repo. We'll manage our Git repos, including what if there's something in the directory that you don't want to sync to your repo, how to deal with that. Finally, we'll talk about sharing your Git repo, specifically GitHub, and how does GitHub relate to Git? How do you create a GitHub repo? If you don't have a GitHub account, sorry, it's not going to be covered right now, because it, again, takes time. How do you create a Git repo? Sharing your repo, and some of the other features that GitHub gives, along with, along with being a Git repo. Then we'll talk about GitLab, covering pretty much the same stuff except for running your own GitLab instance, which is possible. Finally, one thing that I thought was really helpful is if you're creating web pages, you can get Apache. And I know you can do it in Nginx, I just haven't yet. How to get Apache to not serve your Git repo information. And then, as I mentioned, there are things that I'm not going to cover. I don't cover branches because not being a developer, I don't quite get that very well. We'll cover hooks, and then finally sharing your Git repo with remote users. And after that, also on the side, I've got some resources, which is where I got most of the information here, and other information. And then if there are questions at the end that you've held on to, we'll hopefully have time for that. So what is Git? Git is a distributed version control system. What that means is Git will track changes you make to files within the repository. You can go back and see old revisions, you can see what was changed, who changed it, etc. It's most often used in software development to track code changes. Git was created in 2005 by Linus Torvalds to track development of the Linux kernel, and he created this to replace BigKeeper, which was a proprietary product. One thing about Git that's different than Subversion is every Git project directory is a full copy of that repo. So you don't take bits and pieces. The reason why Linus called Git Git is, and this is a direct quote from him, "I'm an egotistical bastard. I name all of my projects after myself. First Linux, now Git." So he's very self-aware of his strengths. And to further show that, if you look at the Git man page, it describes Git as the stupid content tracker. And that still is written that way today, and he wrote it when he started. If you want more info on Git and how it differs from some of the previous version control systems, there's a link down here at the bottom, getting started with Git. Why do you need Git? Git tracks changes to files. That way, if you make a mistake in your code, you can roll back to a previous version before the mistake happened. It's easier than trying to remember what were the changes I made that broke my stuff. Some of the uses for it, as I said, tracking changes in source code or for programs or scripts. Tracking changes in configuration files, which is very helpful, especially if you have configuration management like Puppet, Salt, etc., Ansible. It's much easier to roll back that than it is to figure out what you did. A quick glossary of some of the Git terms. A branch is a line of development. It allows you to take the existing source code and make a copy of it to work on outside in a development environment. You can test things, you can really expand on stuff without breaking the original source code. A commit is a single point in Git history. It's the same as a revision or version in other version controls. We'll show some examples of that. Master is the default branch of your repo. So every repo starts out with a master branch. Merging, if you have two branches, you can merge the branch, and your development branch is doing what it wants, no bugs. Yeah, like there are no bugs in code. You can merge them into the master branch. Origin is the default upstream repository. Pulling, that is fetching a branch and merging it into your local repository. Pushing allows you to add your changes to a remote repository. Rebase will reapply changes from a branch to your base. That you often have to do if you're working on something on your repo. Somebody makes it, saying you have a GitLab repo, you're working on it, somebody makes a change and they commit their changes before you. Git will complain about it, then you'll have to stash your changes at the bottom there and rebase, then reapply your changes. A repo or repository is a collection of objects, and Git has its own little internal database that it uses showing what changes have been made. And finally, a remote repository is a repository that resides somewhere other than your local machine. For example, GitHub, GitLab. And again, the link at the bottom is a link to the official Git glossary, and there's plenty more terms that on there that I wouldn't even dream of covering right now.
John?
Yes?
Commit, is that done on a file-by-file basis? Local?
It doesn't have to be file by file. Say you make a bunch of changes. Like, for example, I have a web page that I have several versions of the page. And I can make changes to all versions, and with a single commit those changes to the repository. So it's not a file or a change-by-change basis. You can have multiple changes. It's better to commit often, and that way you have a smaller window of opportunity for not knowing where something breaks, but you don't have to do it that way. As a side note, before we get started looking at Git, Git has a config file somewhere that keeps your name and email. Until you've set this up, Git will complain when you try to make commits if you don't have first your username and your email address in the configuration. So those of you who are doing this and have only just now installed Git on your laptops, go ahead and run those two commands, and that way you don't get those complaints during while you're playing along.
Is there an easy command to check if I'm working on that?
Yeah, there is, and I can't remember. I think it's just git config, I think, for most of it. Yeah.
Yeah, you git config -- list.
Oh, there you go. Thanks, -- list.
Can you specify a full email address, or does it have to be just a mailbox?
I put a full email, so I use my person, whatever email I happen to be. If it's a work one, my work email. If it's personal.
Oh, no. The example that's shown there is what's known as a mailbox. It's the local part of the domain, nothing else. But you're allowed to have text that is basically commentary as part of an email address.
I don't think so.
It's not allowed in the envelope, but it is allowed in the letter.
I don't think so.
This is your ID. Your name can be whatever. It's just a string.
Yeah.
But an email address is an email address.
Now, the one thing with the email,
Mailbox.
use the same email if you're going to follow along with GitHub or GitLab. Keep that as the same email that you use to sign up for GitHub or GitLab. And if you're doing both, it's probably a good idea to have the same email for both that way. Because I'll show you in the next slide, you can set this information for a specific repo. So say your GitLab and your GitHub do use two different email addresses, you can set it up, have one as the default and then set the other for a specific repo. And it's essentially the same command without -- global, but you'll see that again in the next section. Is everybody ready to go on? Have you done these? Pardon? All right, I see how you code with me, people.
Let me take a photo of that.
If you look on the meetup, I've got a link to the slides. The slides are done in Google Slides, so there's a link to it.
Yeah. Are you going to talk about the relationship between whatever editor you're making the changes with and Git?
Do you have a comment? Is that because you want to know, or you do know?
No, I want to know. I mean, it seems like that's basic.
You can set the default.
It doesn't care.
It doesn't care what edit, as long as it's. Actually, it doesn't care. You can put binary files in the Git repo.
Okay, just at a top level then. You're going to be using an editor to be writing code. You're going to be putting the code someplace. Mm-hmm. Many times that someplace is not even going to be a single directory. It may be a nested set of directories or whatever. Does Git then somehow know where all these directories are and can access the various bits of your code?
Yes, as long as it's pyramid-like. So your Git repo and your Git information, which I'll show you in a minute, will be in the top directory. And then you can branch down and it will recursively follow through that directory. And that'll be your repo.
Okay, now do you have to manually enter that information into Git, or does Git get it from your editor?
You're not going to show that?
I'll show that. When I get to managing your repo, I'll go over things like showing how to add files, remove files, and things like that. So.
But there are a lot of IDEs that, in addition to what you edit, also.
Yeah.
Emacs, VI, will do that too. Yes.
Yeah, and if you like graphical editors, I know Adam does. Sublime, I'm sure does. Pretty much any developer-based focused editor will have a Git extension, shall we say, that you can use. So are we all caught up? Except for somebody who's installing Git? Yeah, I'm going to point you. All right. So as promised, there's the example for setting up the config on a single Git repo. The information when you do that is then held in a directory in your repository, which I'll show you soon. All right, the first thing we're going to do is create an empty Git repo. My personal preference is in my home directory, I have a directory called Git. I put all my Git repositories in there. Whether you do that or not is up to you, but that way I know where all my Git stuff is. So if you want to do that, go ahead. If not, just pick a spot. At this point, an empty directory, and type the command git space init space dot. And that will initialize that directory as a Git repo. And that's all you have to do. You now have a Git repo. In the next few slides, I'll show you what that command actually does and what Git actually does to your to that directory. But so if you do an ls in that directory, just a plain ls, you'll see nothing because it still appears to be an empty directory. But Git will put a directory in there called .git, which as those of us who know Linux know, that that is a quote-unquote hidden directory, and it won't show up in the typical listing. But if you do ls-a, it'll show up there. In there are, in the empty repo, there should be 3 files, one called config, one called description, one called, in all caps, head. Won't talk about all of them in depth, but one I'll give a little bit of an example, well, 2 of them. There will also be 5 directories called branches, hooks, info, objects, and refs. One of the things I did mention is every file in a Git repo is referred to as an object. So the objects directory is where all of those objects will be backed up for when you go back on your changes, or at least information on the changes made. So we'll talk about the files, the first one being config. I will talk about that later. It's more useful when you're using GitLab or GitHub or another remote repo, like Bitbucket, things like that. Description will list has the name of the repository. If you haven't called it anything, it just gives some default blurb and lets it go at that. The head file points to the reference of the current branch. So if you look at the glossary, it'll explain more what the reference is, because I don't quite understand myself. So. The directories that are created, branches will be empty until you have created some branches. Hooks, we'll talk about hooks later, but the hooks directory creates some example hooks that you can use. To get those hooks to work, you just rename them and drop the .sample from the file name. That's a great resource if you want to learn about hooks. Again, I'm not going to cover hooks today, but at least you know where they are. Objects, it contains info, packed directories, which I meant to look up, but it's basically your repo, the backed up file. And refs, objects contain an info directory and a packs directory. The info directory, I think, is where all the changes are held, and I'm not sure what pack does. And then ref contains a heads and a tag directory. Heads is referred to by the all caps head file previously. So that's pretty much all it does. And now you have an empty Git repo to do what you want. The other option is to take existing data and make it into a Git repo. Say you have source code from something, or you've got a web page, or whatever. Again, in that directory, the root of that specific directory, type git init dot. Just like before, the dot at the end is required. It does all the same things that I showed you before. It'll put a few extra little bits and pieces in there because there's already data there, but pretty much the same thing.
John, could you put a path instead of the dot?
I don't know. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You can put the full path. Instead of the dot, you can put a path. Thank you. And thank you. Then type git add and dot or path to your repo. And what Git will do is it will recursively follow that directory and add all the files in that directory to your Git repo to be tracked.
It will complain if it finds a Git repo.
Yeah, you can't create a Git repo in a Git repo.
No, you can't. It'll complain.
Oh, it will let you do it?
It complains.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Then you want to make your first commit, your first snap, or your first point in time in your directory. So git commit minus AM, and A is all, M is message, and I just put initial commit. Whatever you want to do to show this is the baseline where you started your repo.
So what you're basically doing is you're doing the add that you just did above, so you don't need to do your add if you say commit minus A.
Yeah, I do it out of habit because when I don't need it, I'll forget it, and it doesn't hurt to have it in there again. Talk a little bit more about those commands. As I said, the same files will be in the .git directory plus a few more, as Git is now tracking the data. There's a .git/index file, which is your Git database, which is tracking your changes. There's a all caps commit _ edit message, and that can, in this particular case, that will contain the two words initial commit. It will contain the comment from the most recent commit. None of the existing files in your directory are altered in any way, shape, or form. Git does not touch the files themselves in a write sense or a change. It will read all the files, but it won't write to them until you make a change to that file itself. So it is up to you to make the change. So if you have an existing data structure or directory that you want to put into Git, none of your files will be altered by Git. You have to make the changes, not Git. So we'll talk about some of the commands to manage your Git repo. We've already shown git add. Do you have it?
Oh, I just had a question about commit. You type it before you make changes to the directory, and then again,
No, commit only happens after you make the changes. I don't know if it'll complain if you try to commit something that's already been committed. Sounds like an insane asylum. But it doesn't do anything. In fact, there's a different command you want to use before you make changes, and I'll get to that in a second. Especially if you're using a remote repo like GitHub or GitLab. Git RM. Git add dot will follow recursively. And any files, except for those that we ignore, which I'll talk about in a minute, any files recursively down that directory will be added to your repo. Or if you just want to add a single file name or a bunch of file names, you can do git add, then file name. If the file happens to be a directory, it will again recursively go down that directory. Git RM will remove a file. If you just do an RM on a file, Git will still try to track that file. Git will not necessarily recognize that that file doesn't exist anymore.
And save your life.
So if you're really, really sure that you want that file to go away, git space RM file name or git space RM -f directory name. And we'll remove those files from the repo, which is good if you forget to ignore something that you really should have in the before you add it. Again, git commit -am. -a is not required if you do a git add beforehand. It's always better when you have multiple files. I just prefer to do git add dot if I add a bunch of files. But AM, the A should cover that. And then the comments should be descriptive without being a novel. So just a quick thing, updated for X. Just a quick thing so that if somebody's reading through at a quick glance, they can know what changes were made in that commit.
And it's sort of dumb to put the date.
Yeah, you don't need to put the date because that is logged and it's already there. So anyone reading the commit comment will know the date and time the commit was made. These next two are applicable if you're using a remote repository such as GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, blah, blah. Git push will send the changes that you have committed to your remote repo. So you make your changes, you run the commit to commit the changes to Git, and then you run git push, and that'll push all the changes up to GitLab.
If you've got several remote repos, how does it know which one you're talking about?
Each directory structure, while it can have more than one, should only have one repo. So if you're doing a commit in direct web A, for example, the git config file will contain the information on what repo that's associated with. And so it'll only push those. And if you do a git push and you're not in a git directory, it'll laugh at you. Won't let you do it. Git pull, well again, the opposite of push, it'll pull changes down. As you were mentioning, you don't do a commit before and after, but if you have a remote repo, it's always advisable to do a git pull before you start making changes so that you don't have to stash and rebase, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Any questions? Yes?
Can Git handle user-provided metadata? For instance, this module was changed these modules were changed because of the 2019 change in the tax law.
If you want to put that in your comment, that's...
I was thinking of something more voluminous.
You don't really want to.
Put it in a file and check the file in.
Yeah, I mean, you could create it. That would be something that would go in a change log.
So often what you can do is you will build the whole pipeline. So whenever you check in, you have to refer to an OpenBZ or some open case that says this is a job you're working on. So when you check in, there will be a reference to, let's say, it could be a WordPress, it could be, a general Bugzilla that says this is the issue that this is addressing, and in there all the details will be.
So yeah, you want to keep your commit comments short, just so that somebody at a very quick glance can know what changes you make. Because oftentimes, if you have something that a repo that a lot of people are working on, and you can have hundreds of commits, and if somebody's looking for a single change, to have to read, long comments, you're making their life more difficult. So quick and
another comment to that. I know you're not covering it, so that's fine. This is why we have branches. Right?
Yes.
So initially, what you will do is, let's say you have a tax law change, and that's your project. You will create a branch that reflects that change. Now you're going to have lots of commits in that branch from lots of different team members. But when you're all done, that branch is separately documented. And what people then do is, you now can create what's called a pull request that takes, here's all the changes I've done, and that pull request can be associated with all the reasons for why you're doing this. That goes to the original owner of the repository, the guy who has the commit rights, or girl for that matter, and they can then see all the changes you've done, all the commits you have done, and how that would affect the project, and that's where they will do thumbs up or thumbs down, whether they accept it or not. So you document very, very well what it is you're working on. And this is one of the reasons we use branches, not the only reason, but one of the reasons.
Yeah. So
Explain to me, where is this remote repo? You talk about GitHub, we're working on a project and the live thing is here. Is that where the repo is? Forget about the distributed part.
Every different location. So, for example, we'll talk about GitHub and GitLab in a few minutes. Those are like central repositories, is how they're used. So, say you and I both have read-write access to a repository on GitLab. Your copy of it is a full copy of the entire repo. My copy is a full copy of the entire repo. We could, I think, set it up so that we could make changes directly, but you wouldn't want to. But you could, anybody who has that repo has a full copy of your repo.
I get confused about distributed nature versus the remote repo. So the three, if there are two people, and you have that, there's three copies.
In the case of using GitLab or GitHub, yes. Yeah, everybody has a full copy of the repo.
It's a minimum of copies, because you can have multiple copies of your own repo.
That is true. That is true. You can have them in different
You only
ways.
usually copy the branches that you work on. So you may have hundreds or hundreds of branches in a central repo somewhere. You're only pulling down the stuff that you're working on.
Right. Yeah. So you know, branches are an exception to that, but I've not dealt with branches. So you had it.
It seems like you can only commit or add files that are actually in the repo directory. Am I correct in that structure?
Yeah, they've got to be.
Does that mean that most developers then actually do their development within the repo?
Within their local repo. Their local copy of the repo, yes.
But everything in Linux has a tree. Right? You know, we create, if you have a root, but then every time we do something, we create a directory and we put all our stuff in there, that makes a lot of directories and so on. This is the same thing. You create a directory that is your repo, and underneath that you create everything else you want, the whole structure you want. But from that directory, that's your root for your repository, that's, so your sender, that's where your Git repo lives. All the subdirectories underneath that is owned by it, managed by it.
And by the way, I will say Git repo, as Peter mentioned, your Git repo could be a branch of the main repo. I'm using it just globally for my own preference.
John, if I may say the reason for my question, your comment early in the intro said something about saving config file on the system in a Git repository.
Right.
Well, there the real file is out in the etc. directory or wherever.
No, you don't want to do that. What you can do, I believe you can create a hook that when your config files are changed, it will then copy them to. Is that the best way to do
You
it?
can do that way. So
Better to make a package.
yeah.
Yeah.
In the end, if you only have one box, it really doesn't matter. You can go to your Etsy directory and say Git in it, just like we did here. Check all your configuration files in, and now it will track all of those changes. Just like all the stuff that John has been talking about, that will work. But if you want to easily take what you've done there and put down another box, you really want to do this separately. Right? So that becomes a build, part of your build. So what you typically will do is you will have a repo that says, here's my Etsy branch, here's my, let's say, user branch level, configuration file, whatever that you have. Those are all in Git repos. You may have it per project too. And then when you build your server, you will pull down those repos and then have a small script that says, install these files in the right location. And that may need to be so flexible because not every distribution agrees on where to put the files. So if you made it specific to one distribution, you may run into trouble with everything too. Right. And you will have this install file that would take what you've done with repo and put it in the right places.
But the key difference is not that config file, when you set the repo, it's put into the the directory that you set it up to. It's not a separate .config file in your
Well,
folder.
Okay, the config files we're talking about isn't the one in .git.
Okay.
That's not what we're referring to. We're referring to, like Peter said, if you have a single machine and you put all the /etc config files as a Git repo.
I would try to ignore the .git directory file.
Yeah.
That's very, very advanced stuff. Just look at your files, and every time you say git add or whatever, that's going into the repository.
Right.
And I'm sure we will show the commands on how to see what's in there and like that.
And later on, I will reference the .git/config file for a specific reason. And I will specifically point out that that's the file I'm talking about. Yeah.
Is there provision for using Git in conjunction with packages like Docker?
Yeah, you can. You definitely can, and you'd want to have, that's where you'd use like Docker ignore to ignore your Git directory, but you can do that, yeah. And a lot of places do. But how to do it is well beyond what we're going into today. So, I've mentioned it a couple times, Git stash. So say, for example, I also brought this example earlier. You have a repository on GitHub or GitLab, and you make changes to files, and while you're making changes, somebody in another department or one of your colleagues makes changes to the same repository. And they push their changes up to the repository before you've committed and pushed yours. So what happens then is when you try to push your changes, you can commit them, it won't argue. But when you try to push those changes, Git will complain that the remote repository is different from your remote repository before you made your changes. So it will notice that there are differences, and it will complain, and it will ask you to stash your changes. And you do that with the git stash command, and what that will do is it will temporarily withdraw those changes and store them out kind of sort of separate from your repository. So it'll take the changes out, store what the changes are, and return your local repository to the state it was in before you made changes. Yeah?
You led with it's already committed. Git stash is for live change files.
That's a good point.
Because if it's already committed, you already have to take repo, you need to do a git rebase master to pull it down.
Yeah, okay.
A better example is you're in the middle of editing 50 files, your buddy goes, stuff's down, make changes right now. You do git stash, put it in the corner, make a quick change, push it.
Okay.
Git stash apply to pull your changes back out.
Yes, like that.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. As I said, you weren't here when I said it. I'm not by any means a Git expert. So
nobody is.
So, well, yeah, there is that. But
Git experts and send experts. They exist apparently, but nobody's ever.
Yeah. All right. So I'm not very advanced at Git. Is that better? So yeah, what he said. So git stash, you've got git stash save, and again, like a git commit, you put a comment to explain what the work or what was needed to stage. Once you're back and you want to reapply the changes you made, git stash pop. The stuff in parentheses is optional. If you don't put it in there, it'll take the last stash and apply those changes. If you do git stash list, it'll list the existing stashes, and at the beginning of each listing, it will say stash at, and then a number in curly braces. That way you can actually reapply changes to any of those stashes if you have older ones. Git stash apply. Now when you do the pop, the stash will still, no, when you do the pop, the stash will be taken from the list of stashes. So it'll move that stash to your current repo. Git stash apply will just copy those changes in and still track and still keep track of that particular stash. Does that make sense? Yes.
So by definition, that's not something that's going to be pushed to a remote repo, right?
Not the stashes themselves, no.
Yeah.
Just, once the stashes have been reapplied, then yeah. One of the things that allows Git to track these changes or allows you to see what changes were done were Git logs. So Git space log will show you a version history. Somebody asked before about doing longer commit comments. This is where that would apply, because it'll list the information about the change itself, the commit itself, and then the comment. So if you have a 4-paragraph long comment, somebody looking through the log is going to have to read through that comment to know what changes you made. So you really want your changes to be concise. Git status. That will show the status of your repo at that moment. So if you have made changes to a file and you have not committed those changes, bless you. Git status will show you that you have uncommitted changes. If you're working with a remote repository on GitLab, it will, bless you. Man, people stop.
No, bless them.
Well, yeah, we'll keep blessing you. Because when you developers come and say, I didn't make any changes, I can do git blame and say, well, on this date, at this time, you made this commit. You did make changes. And carry on your merry way and let them get in trouble.
There's a kinder, gentler switch too. Get praised. That's the same thing.
Does it? Nice.
Somebody showed me that a couple months ago. I had not noticed.
I hadn't. That's good. I like that. Yeah.
So, what form does diff show the changes, the difference?
Text.
Is it line by line text?
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, it's much like the diff command in Linux, I believe. It'll show you. Yeah, I forgot that line, didn't I? Thank you.
Git blame goes through each line of the file and gives you a commit number, a name, a timestamp, and the change.
Yes.
It's very useful.
Yes, it is. It's a beautiful thing.
If you have a 1,000-line file, you get 1,000 lines out of it.
If they're all changed, for all the
I've mentioned it before a couple of times. What do you do if there are files that you have in your repo that you really don't want to be managed by Git? You don't want Git to know about. And so in your repo, along with your .git directory, you can add a .git ignore file. In that file, you list line by line each of the directories or files that you do not want Git to care about. Why might you want to do that? So, say you've got temporary data, say your script, you're writing a script, and that script uses a file to pull in data to act on. You don't really need for other people to have that specific file. So list that in .git ignore, and Git will not will not commit that file. It will just, as the name says, ignore the file. Occasionally, and please realize that working in operations, this is a bad idea. But if you happen to have, for whatever reason, a file with sensitive information such as usernames and passwords, and you have a remote, especially if you have a remote repo like GitLab. And again, you don't want to do this. If I'm a sysadmin and I find you doing this, I won't be happy. That would be a reason. Or files not crucial to your application that you need, or vary from person to person.
USC files that get dumped all over the place.
Yeah. One of the things that, of course, never happens is that you inherit a badly configured package from somebody else.
You're right, that never happens.
And sometimes management will allow you to clean it up and do things the way they should be, but sometimes you just have to live with it the way it is misconfigured.
That's true, yes. That is, sometimes you do inherit crap. And sometimes you have to deal with it. So that would be a reason. Any questions?
That's just another managed file. Git ignore, you also have to check it in and commit it. So it's just another, file.
Git does manage that file. So again, you can use git blame on that file and see who added a file that you didn't want to be in there, or who took out a file that should be in there. Git blame's a wonderful thing. Sharing your Git repo. Initially, when Git came out, this could be a bit of a pain in the butt. There is a Git daemon that you could use, but your repo would then be read-only, and I've never dealt with it, thankfully. I've never used Git when that was an issue. You could also use an app like Gitosis, which I have used, and it was very helpful. It's a great way to set permissions on your repo for users that can access and maintain, their SSH keys, and which we'll talk about in a little bit, and stuff like that. Back then, before GitHub and GitLab became a thing, that's how it happened. Thankfully, GitHub and GitLab now exist, and others like it. So this isn't as much of an issue. So, all right, so that's the generals about Git, obviously from command line. Keep in mind there are GUI applications that can manage Git, and if you want to use those, if you like the pointy clicky world of that, then there are ways to do it. But having been a sysadmin, I prefer command line, and it's always good to know what a program's doing behind the scenes. So now, if you do use a GUI to manage your Git, you can have somewhat of an idea of what it's doing in the background when you commit, etc. So, any questions on the command line? Yeah.
On a POP, is there provision for reconciling changes to the same file?
What do you mean?
You do a stash. You make some changes to a file. You commit it, and then you do a stash pop to get your original changes back. But your original changes hit the same file that you just committed. Some configuration packages will do a diff and give you somewhat of an assist in merging changes. Is there anything like that in Git?
There is, because otherwise there is a way to do it, and quite honestly, I don't know how.
You'll get it for free as long as you don't change the same line.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're not going to be working in the same line as long as the most common place where you run into trouble, if you have this big common config file and you both add something at the bottom, you'll get merged out. But if you both want around the same file,
And there are ways to resolve merge conflicts.
There's a whole merge. Actually, that was one of the main reasons Git was created initially, was how hard merging and managing that was with the traditional one. So it was built with the idea that you had multiple developers all pushing into the same files and they all had to be managed.
As long as you're on the same line, you get it for free.
So, all right. So, those of you who've been here for a while know my absolute opinions on GitHub or on Microsoft. The two are now. Yeah.
Sorry.
Don't apologize, man. I'm okay with it.
I'm just really, obviously, I'm really new to Linux. Git. So, one repository, I know configuration management. If one repository has a different file structure than the other, that's not going to work because the configuration file string lists where they're located.
Yeah, if you have two different repos with two different directory structures, you have two different repos.
Yes.
They've got to be treated differently.
Okay.
You've got to figure out, you at that point have to manually merge them into an agreed structure,
Right.
and then use that.
So yeah, the configuration management files are not going to, they're going to track each file in their stack of the latest version and all the versions, and they're going to do it for each file, but they're not going to track the directory structure. If it doesn't,
Git does track the directory structure.
in another.
So repo, this instance of a repo is going to match more or less byte for byte. Some minor exception, byte for byte. A copy of it. So repos are copies. So you have your GitLab repo in GitLab, and then you've got your local copy. It's a copy.
Yes.
So the directory structures cannot be different.
Yes.
And if they are, then one of them's going to win. So if you go through and change the directory structure, somebody else goes through and changes the directory structure, then you two have to have an argument about and come to an agreement.
That can't happen. Like every commit you have is signed.
Right.
So it knows exactly what the changes are. So if you have the same commit ID, you have the exact same changes, which is what you get when you clone a repo. So you know your repo system now. You may be at history times 1, they may be at history times 10, and hence you're lacking some commits that they have. But the commits you have in common are exactly the same. Same structure, same content, same everything.
So you make a change in one repo, it'll sign it, it will show every other repo. To get the agreement.
Remember, you can't change an existing commit. You can add a new commit. You're never changing existing stuff, only adding to the change. So if you get a repo and you make your changes local, no one else sees that in the world until you push it up. And only if you have rights to do that can you actually make changes that everyone else sees. If you don't have the right, you have to create a pull request. And then the people who has that right will see, here's all the changes you committed, all your commit IDs that they don't have, they will accept that, and now everyone else can pull those down. So it's not like a file system where you go and look at the file. Think worm wide, think CD-ROM, write once, read a lot of times. You just keep on adding and adding and adding. So, and that's the same as for deleting a file. When you delete a file, you're actually not removing it. You're setting a mark. So if you're getting an older version, you're still getting that file. So it's like a history, a commit mark, or whatever you want to call that.
I see. Yeah, that's the history. That makes sense. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
All right, somebody on YouTube remotely has a question.
Yeah, we have a remote question. It might be worth mentioning that the exclude is very important if you have any credentialing files in the project. You don't want those in a public repo.
Right.
Lots of people have made very serious mistakes. Yes.
That needs to be part of your pipeline, check with them.
Yeah. So, all right. gonna go on, as I mentioned, everybody knows how much of a fan of Microsoft I am. GitHub is now owned by Microsoft. However, I will say they have not ruined it yet.
Pretty soon Microsoft's going to be running a Linux kernel. Then what are you going to do?
They haven't ruined it.
IBM beat them to them.
Yeah. We're going to talk about GitHub next. A lot of stuff we talk about between GitHub and GitLab is going to be the same. My preference, I tend to use GitLab for two reasons, which I'll get to. The first one being the Microsoft thing. And then I'll explain a couple more as we go along. So, how does GitHub relate to Git? GitHub was released in February of 2008. It was created using Ruby on Rails. In the About page of GitHub, it gives you more of a history of it, but that's good enough for now. GitHub builds on the functionality of Git by hosting Git repositories and adding features such as bug tracking, feature requests, and wikis, among other services. So GitHub is not just Git. It takes Git and adds a lot of help and added a lot of helpful services to it. GitHub has 3 different levels of account. You can have a free account, a professional account, and team accounts. Team accounts are mainly for businesses. There's a link down on there which gives you a comparison of the features. I'm not going over it. Repositories can be public, which the public has read-only access to the repo. They can pull down the repo and do pull requests and such as that, but they don't have access to the repo itself. Or private repos, so you can give users and collaborators specific access so they can make changes. So if you have a group of developers, you can, give them access to the repo to make changes. Yeah?
Just a brief slide. It's actually nice in the Microsoft did one of those main features.
I'm going to get to that. I will get to that. In fact, the next slide on there. In January of 2019, January of this year, free accounts were allowed unlimited private repos. My Microsoft lack of love influences this. How do I create a Git repo? When you create a GitHub account, this is the page you're faced with. You have no repositories, you've got no information. So you'll need to create your first repository. And in this case, they call it Start a Project. So you click on Start a Project, and you're given this page. I did create this account just for this talk, and I'll delete it after. But so you fill in the information, repository name. If you want a description, you can decide public or private. And I'm normally, if you're not going to bring in if you're not importing an existing repository, if you make a README file, this allows you to clone that repository immediate to your local machine immediately. If you don't, you can't clone an empty repository. Why? I don't know, but I guess I have a reason. You can also add a gitignore file or an added license. Most of the time, if you're just creating an empty repository, you won't do that yet because you'll want to bring stuff in. So here it is filled out. If you're following, I named my repo my test repo, and description is this is a test. I made it public, and I initialized the repository with the README file because that's just too exciting. And then it'll give you this. So that's my first GitHub repository for this account. The README file is all caps readme.md. MD generally implies that the file is in Markdown, which in this case it is. So if you know Markdown, you can edit the file with a text editor and make it all pretty. Again, once you've done this, so say you want to share your repo, even if it's just sharing with yourself on your local machine. You have a clone or download button, and when you click that button, initially you'll get this window pop up. Clone with HTTPS. This is just a read-only copy of your repo. That's what the public will be able to do because it's a public repo. And it gives you HTTPS and then the URL for the repo. If you're bringing it to your local machine for you to work on because it's your repo, you want to use SSH. At this point, it'll complain because you do not have an SSH key uploaded to GitHub. GitHub requires you to use it. You can't SSH with just a password to GitHub. You have to use a key. So if you follow this link, it'll just take you to a page that shows you how to do it. Or it'll say you can clone using HTTPS. So to upload your public SSH key file, because God knows you don't want to put your private one there. Up here, there's a little icon. Your icon will be different because it's just some random thing, similar but different. If you click on that, you will get this drop down. From this drop down, if you click on Settings, it'll take you to this page, and it'll show you your profile initially. I'm assuming you all configured that I clicked on SSH and GPG keys. So click on that, then click on New SSH Key, and from here you create a title for your key, like my personal key or whatever, and you add your public key. You copy and paste your public key in, and then add SSH key, and that's kind of an example of my public key in there. And then add SSH key. I could not do it because I didn't feel like creating a new key. For those of you who may have multiple accounts, you cannot use the same public key on more than one GitHub account. And the same is true with GitLab. It will complain that you've already used this key, and on this particular laptop when I was doing this, I only had the one key. So I couldn't change it. So I can't show you what the page looks like once you have it. So then, once you've done that, or once you click on copy or copy, depending on how you want to do it, you go back to your machine, and in your Git folder or wherever you want to put your Git repositories, you run the command git clone, and then you paste whatever you copied from the previous page. So in the case of, so git clone the SSH or HTTPS line. And below that is an example of what mine looked like. Yeah. Because the public can only use a read only. That's why you have HTTPS. If you do SSH, then you have read write to it. So a public, if it were a public repo and somebody was not a collaborator on your project, they would not see the SSH option. They'd only see the HTTPS because they only have the right. HTTPS will only give right access to your read. Does that make sense? You can clone it. Anyone can clone it and do whatever they want to it. They just can't push. They now can't push changes.
Yeah, but you can push changes even if you use HTTPS. And I use HTTPS.
Can you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't use. I use SSH when I do it. So again, that would be a user thing. So some of the other GitHub features. Markdown, readme.md file, which they populate for you. It uses Markdown, as I said, and allows you to give information about your project. You don't necessarily want to use it for massive amounts of documentation, just a quick intro to your project, maybe how to install whatever. Otherwise, you can use the wiki, which will give you more detail.
Yeah, a lot of people put links to the wiki in the Markdown.
Yeah.
Is that just basic Markdown, or does it include some of the extensions?
I think it's just basic. I could be wrong, but my initial feeling would be it's just
GitHub has
basic.
its own like Markdown flavor as they all
Pardon?
GitHub has its own Markdown flavor as they
Does. Yeah. It will allow teams and other contributors in the paid-for versions. You can set people to collaborate with you. It will give you info on your project, such as number of commits, contributor contribution, repo, forks, and pull requests. You can get all that from Git, but this shows up in a nice, pretty web page that managers like because they don't read. All right. Any questions about GitHub? Yes.
This applies to both. Are they both browser agnostic, or are they?
Yes. They are both browser agnostic. Although why do you want to use Edge or Internet Explorer, I don't know. But if you must, you can.
Because I'm using someone else's machine and I have no control over what's installed.
You might have a problem with links.
Yeah, okay. Links would be an issue. Let's say graphical browser agnostic. All right, no questions on GitHub? GitLab is going to be very similar. There are two big differences between GitHub and GitLab, and I'll get to them. Again, how does it relate to Git? Same way GitHub does. GitLab was released in 2011. It was created using Ruby as opposed to Ruby on Rails. Right now it uses an amalgamation of Ruby, Go, and I think two or three other frameworks. It builds on the functionality by hosting repositories and adding features such as bug tracking, feature requests, and wikis, among other services, including an integrated CI/CD pipeline, or whatever you want to call that. GitLab has 4 levels of accounts on their web-based version. Actually, 4. From free, which is obviously free, to gold, which is $99 per user per month. Sorry, I put year on there. It is per month. And again, there's their about.gitlab.com/pricing gives you the differences. Repositories, again, can be public or private. So how do you create a GitLab repo? This is the initial page when you log on. You don't have anything, no repos, no projects, nothing. From there, you want to start create projects. They do give you 30 days of GitLab Gold. They don't even ask a credit card until you get to the end of the 30 days. But don't do it, because there will be something on there that you just can't live without, and then you're stuck when trying to figure out how the hell you're going to pay $99 a month. So, you know, beware. You can create groups, you can look around and learn more about GitLab from here. But we're going to create a project. And again, kind of similar to what we saw in GitHub. You name your project. Once you name the project up top, it'll give you that. And in the case of this, my project will then be https://gitlab.com/ennoil/mytestrepo. You can write a description. You can make it private, public, or internal. Internal, they don't have in GitHub. And that's, again, for the paid version, so that if you can have your team collaborate. Again, initialize with the README so that you can immediately clone your repo, because I don't want to be dealing with all this stuff in the web browser. I want to do it locally. So I'm going to force my views upon all of you. Not that I haven't already. Once you've created the repo, you'll get this. And similar to GitHub, but at a different stage, it will tell you you won't be able to push or pull project files via SSH until you update or add an SSH key. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, you click on up here in the corner, there's that random avatar. You can change them in your profile. You're not stuck with what they give you. So again, click settings. It brings you to the same thing. You add your title, your key, press add key. Again, I can't do it because this key is being used by my normal account, so I can't show you at the end what it looks like. Sorry. Not that it really matters what it looks like, so I wasn't too upset. And there you go. You've got your repo now, and you can make your, if you click up here and clone, instead of having to switch back and forth between HTTPS and SSH, it will give you both in the same window. Again, go back to your computer, git clone. Whoops, I carried over my GitHub example, but it's kind of the same thing, just that would be GitLab. Some of the other features, again, Markdown, Wiki, other teams and contributors, the same info on your projects, but again, the integrated CI/CD. I'm not going to cover it because I know less about CI/CD than I obviously know about Git. So I couldn't even begin to guess on how to show it. But from what I understand and what I've heard, it is actually a good application. and good use of CI and CD. And for those who are not developers, and CI is continuous integration, CD is continuous delivery. That's part of being agile. So they say.
Would you say continuously broken and what?
Yeah. Continuously inferior and continuously deficient. All right, as I mentioned, you can I run my own GitLab instance? Why, yes. Yes, you can. You can download GitHub for your own happy amusement and enjoyment. I would, however, as a private citizen, not want to do that in the cloud, because GitLab itself wants 4 gig of free memory. That's after your OS and any other applications have consumed their memory. So you're probably looking at, realistically, an 8 gig machine. And if you've looked at Amazon pricing and Google Cloud and Azure, that would be kind of expensive. And I don't have that kind of money.
What about just running it on the local?
You can run it on the local VM, the local machine, just it needs to have 8 gig of RAM. They say 4 gig of free RAM, which I translate to 8 gig of RAM with all the other.
I run it on much less than that, but I cheat. The OS thinks it has more than that.
I played around a little bit with GitHub, and then I looked at GitLab, even before they had the free instance, and I wound up just setting up Git on a Raspberry Pi with a terabyte of hard drive.
Yeah.
I'm happy with the command line. If I switch to GitLab, and if I run it in that kind of environment,
you can still. You get all the fun integrations like the CI/CD and all that crap. If if you're happy doing what you're doing,
yeah, I'm just one guy, so
then keep doing what you're doing. It doesn't hurt. Yeah.
Also, too, something to keep in mind: Git at its core is bound to SSH. So, if you want any place you can SSH to, you technically can host a repo there, pure command line, to be clear. But if you just want to get it off your bot, like first, if you do a lot of development on your laptop, if you have a remote machine you have SSH to, you can literally have it sitting there, and every now and then before you shut down your laptop, you just do a get push, and it puts a copy up there. Actually, if you have SSH to the bots, you yourself. You can't share it. You don't get any pull requests. Certainly no CI/CD stuff. But at the very least, depending on what thing you're working on, if you're just trying to squirrel away someplace else, it's pretty handy.
Just like the hosted version, there are 4 different levels. There's free with community support all the way up to Ultimate, which has 24/7 uptime support and a bunch of other features that, again, if you go to the pricing page, you can switch between hosted and self-hosted. And again, that's $99 a month. So if you use that and put it on Amazon, come talk to me, because I've got some stuff I can sell you on a continual basis. There is also, for those who are really into Docker, there is a Docker image for GitLab. So for both the community, the free version is referred to as the community edition. The paid-for versions are enterprise editions, and if you don't pay for it, it automatically downgrades the enterprise to community. And there are images for both Docker images. Yeah.
just Amazon.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, if you can afford that, let me know. We'll have.
I got a deal for you.
I got lots of deals for you if you can afford that on your own. All right, Any questions on GitLab? Any questions on anything I've covered or not covered already? All right. As I mentioned, one of the cool things I found is a way to have Apache not serve your .git directory. And there it is in your site config file in the virtual host stanza. Directory match, blah, 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 .git, order, deny, allow, and deny from all. Easy enough. There is an Nginx equivalent. I just didn't know it off the top of my head. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I sure as heck wasn't looking it up.
Could be like you're deploying like a website kind of thing?
Yeah, if you wanted to have have one of your remote repos be on your web server.
Well, the .git directory does not have to be in the same spot. You can actually deploy it and actually push to a...
I know, but I'm strange. I did it this way, actually, before I figured out a different way to do it, and I still love that. Yeah?
So just a question on the difference between GitHub and GitLab.
Yeah.
GitHub allows projects to have their own web page. Same thing for GitLab?
I think they do, I just don't know how they do it.
I guess I'm from
One of the other things, if you've been around for a little while, you saw there is a way to write presentations in Markdown and share them on Git and show them through that. So your presentation just becomes a text file. That does work with both GitHub and GitLab. Hopefully, if the next time I talk, if there is a next time, I will do my presentation in that. Again, I just didn't have time. So some of the things I didn't cover that you can do, as I said over and over again, branches. It allows different environments of the same code, keeps your development out of production until you're ready to merge, allows experimentation with code in a place where it will not affect your stable code. Both of which are very important and very good reasons to learn branching, and I will eventually. Hooks, we talked about, allows you to run scripts based on Git actions. And again, if you look in your .git/hooks, it'll show you examples. There are example scripts in there, which are really good to help learn. So, we covered what is Git, why do I need it, some glossary terms, all that crap. We covered that. I'm not going to read it again. If you went to the presentation on Google Docs, there's some additional resources. A lot of the stuff I got was from here. The bottom one I just found this morning is a tutorial on how to do pull requests from it applies to either GitHub or GitLab. I think they use GitHub as an example. And it wasn't a bad tutorial from the 5 minutes I spent looking at it. And that's it. Any questions?
We have another remote question.
Yes.
And this reminds me of your -A statement earlier that you just do it. So any tips on how to train yourself to remember to use Git? It seems like I go through several iterations of change, break something, and say, oh crap, if only I'd been adding my changes.
Habit.
Habit, okay.
I mean, it's just, it's that mantra, save early, save often. You have to get yourself in the habit of doing it. There's no, I'm pretty sure Git won't set a reminder that says, hey, you made 4 changes, let's commit. No, it doesn't do that. It's up to you to get yourself into the good habits of doing that. Again, it's like adding comments to your code. nobody's going to tell you to do it until somebody tries to look at your code and can't figure out what you're doing. So it's all on your own willpower and reminders. Anything else? All right. So again, if any of you want to come up and talk, so you don't have to listen to me, I am really happy to entertain that. I'm sure Peter is too, because between the two of us, we do this way more than we want to. Yeah. Cool. Talk to me. Come up while I'm packing up, and we'll talk about it. Again, I want to thank Ridgeline International for the space. I want to thank Susie for the food, which I will steal some in a minute.
And that's SG2 Recruiting?
Yeah, SG2 Recruiting. Their websites are on the meetup page. Anything else anyone want to bring up? All right, last thing, those of you who are looking for jobs, those of you who are hiring, please come hang out over in this corner. Just hang out there and figure out what the hell you want to do.
Jack, you want to show? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, actually. I just started going to another meetup called Code With Me. They are starting they started last week. It's a weekly meetup, and they're starting they just started a series on Python. I think this Thursday will be the next meeting. I forget what library they're at, and they're going to cover Python 2 with AWS and Boto. Last week they did just a basic intro to Python, but they are on Meetup, so if you have the time, it's a really good. They do a really good job of talking.
Also, this is like the nerve center where I need to be because I'm actually doing the really explosive thing. So if anybody is attempted to get past it or is studying for it right now and trying to get in for October 1st, just come to me because I kind of need to talk to people. Anybody want to share notes with me or whatever. Am I the only one? Raise your hand if you're Okay.
John, do you want to show a live demo? Do you have time for that? Can I actually show checking in files on a terminal?
I don't have anything set up. By the time I get it, that'll be.
Oh, okay.
So, and Peter, it reminds me, you need to update next month's for your speaker.
I have that. I need to upload. I got the synopsis and all that, but I've been too slow on page one.
Okay.
It is
All right.
confirmed.
All right, so I will not be here for the next 2 meetings, so you all will, I'm sure, be happy about that.
I'm going to get on top of it.
So have a good few months, and I will see you all in October, but we'll be back every second Saturday. It's at a different library. Fairfax County Library.
Okay, that's not you.